Hey, everybody, and thanks for joining us. We're here to talk about the CMMC back and forth, another change for DoD contractors. My name is Jake Milstein. I host the events for Critical Insight. While we wait for folks to get in the room, wow, like what a back and forth CMMC has been, and we're going to talk about it today. And I know there's one person on the call here who has said before, I think in another one of these webinars, it's the whiplash from the feds here. And then on Friday, I was at a Seattle cybersecurity conference, and there were three people who came up to our booth, not to talk to us, but just to complain about CMMC. So and I told them about this webinar, and I think one of them's here in the room here. So anyway, thank you everybody for joining us. We decided to do another CMMC webinar, and I don't know if you came to our first one when they went from 1.0 to 2.0 back to 1.0. But what happened this time is that the DoD CIO said, just kidding, to the 40,000 folks holding CUI, saying, well, all right, we're not going to, you can attest, you can do self-attest, and now you have to go back and have full attest. And so we're going to, or not full attest, but go back and have a full compliance. And so we're going to go through that today. We're going to talk about what's changed, and we'll talk here for about an hour. Now, a couple things to know. There's a chat, and it's on the right. And the chat is really one of the best parts of of our events here. And we do a ton of events. We do security awareness training. We do all sorts of things. So over on the right in the chat, tell us where you're from, and then interrupt people with questions, because I love interrupting the panelists with questions. You will get a recording of this. Everybody always asks. If you've registered for this, the system will automatically send you a recording. It is a system, and I think everybody here knows systems don't always work. So if you don't get a recording, shoot me an email, shoot us an email, and we will send you a link to it. So today we're going to talk about CMMC 2.0. We're going to talk about 1.0 versus 2.0. We're going to talk about how it's evolved and the timeline, and what you should be looking at is your timeline. And we're going to be talking about compliance. And it says questions and answers at the end, but really the best thing to do is to interrupt and ask questions as we go, and then we'll have plenty of questions in the end. A little bit about us. So Critical Insight defends critical services against cyber attacks. The critical industries we serve include hospitals, utilities, cities, counties, defense contractors that are essential to everyone's daily life. We're their security operations center and so much more. We watch networks 24/7 to spot and stop attacks, so folks can deliver the critical services. And joining me today is Fred Langston, Critical Insight co-founder and EVP of Professional Services, Elise Dennis, who we just learned before this. People at DEF CON were calling her, what was it, Elise? She's not going to say it. Anyway.
I'm not going to say it.
But as you can imagine, if your name is Elise, sometimes people call you Athena or other things. But her name is Elise, and she's fantastic. She's senior consultant here on professional services, and she's a social engineering black belt. Dustin Smith, lead consultant professional services, and CMMC Savant. Before that said CMMC lead, but we changed it to Savant because we have a sense of humor. And then me. So with that, Elise and Dustin and Fred, go ahead.
All right, welcome everyone. We're going to be talking predominantly about the changes that you're experiencing now and what's to come, but I thought it would be great for us to start with just a simple overview of what the CMMC is, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and the fact that the DoD or Department of Defense has developed this to enhance cybersecurity standards for its contractors and subcontractors, and also to make sure that we are processing CUI, or controlled unclassified information, and adhering to data handling requirements as defined by NIST, and specifically the 800-171. Prime contractors and subcontractors for the DoD may see CMMC requirements in RFIs and RFPs, and failing to meet these requirements could cause them to miss out on new contracts and awards. So that is what really is at the crux of this and why it's so important, because we want to make sure that our DoD contractors are eligible and go to the top of the list for new contracts and then are able to retain their existing contracts. We also have some examples of the CUI data on the right-hand side for anyone who's unclear of what those specific things are. And next slide, Dustin.
All right, yeah, thanks. So what we're looking at here is the difference between CMMC 1.0 and CMMC 2.0. Recently in November, the DoD Chief Information Office released their strategic intent on how they want to go forward with CMMC. And that's what CMMC 2.0 is. Originally, CMMC 1.0 had 5 different levels. Level 1 was your basic FCI information that consisted of, basic security practices for that were included in the Dfar's regulation. Level 2 added 2 maturity processes, which included policies, procedures for implementing those CMMC practices, and they were explicitly included into the CMMC framework. And so you're looking at additional 72 practices at level 2, but there was not an assessment for level 2. It was a bridge level to level 3, which was for contractors that processed, stored, and transmitted CUI data. That required the level 3 controls, which for level 1 or for CMMC 1.0, included 130 practices. So that was the 110, 800, NIST 800, 171 practices with an additional 20 CMMC practices that were added into level 3. And it included also an additional process, which was you had to show that you were managing your cybersecurity program with plans, resource plans, and things like that to show that you were managing and providing enough resources to support the security program. And then you had level 4, which was also a bridge to the level 5, which was based on the NIST 800-172 requirements, which were additional safeguards for critical programs. And that level 5 included advanced cybersecurity practices like having a 24/7 SOC, immediate incident response team, utilizing threat intelligence, and advanced mature cybersecurity practices. So now we're looking at CMMC 2.0, and that was released in November. Originally, when they released it, they had stated that they were going to only have a small subset of CUI holders have to go out and get a certified third-party assessment. Well, that's changed, and now the DoD CIO has determined that all CUI holding contractors will have to go out and obtain a third-party assessment through the CMMC AB, the organization that manages all the C3PAOs, and those are the companies that will be performing those certified assessments. So yeah,
hey, Dustin, this is I just want to interrupt you for a second, because this is what came up at the conference last week. Like one of the guys I was talking to was one of these 40,000 who were like, "Hey, we're free from these," and now the DoD CIO has said this, so for sure it's happening, and all 80,000 have to go through this.
So they've released their strategic intent, and they're serious about it. They're going through the rulemaking process right now, which we'll go over momentarily about the timeline, the projected timeline for the rulemaking. When that becomes official is dependent on when the rulemaking process is complete. And then at that point, CMMC 2.0 will go live, and they'll start phasing in certified CMMC assessments. And you see, like with CMMC 2.0, they've collapsed it into 3 different levels on the right here. So level 2 is essentially the old level 2 and 3. That that is based on the NIST 800-171 requirements, the 110 practices. They took out the additional 20 CMMC practices that they had in level 3 of CMMC 1.0. But one thing to consider is NIST 800-171 is planning to go through another revision this year, and there's talk that they might add those 20 controls back in addition to additional controls, because 800-171 is based off of the NIST 853 document, a much larger document for the federal government, and they just revised that. So look out for controls coming, flowing down from 853 into 171 by the end of the year.
And hey, Dustin, off the top of your head, do you know what some of those controls are?
Yeah, so the additional 20 controls for CMMC had to do with asset management. There were additional auditing controls, incident response controls. There were important controls around doing backups to prevent against things like malware, which are ransomware, which is important for the DIB to protect against, because it can impede on your operations. Especially if you're a manufacturing company. That's important security practices. So look out for those to come back in. There was also the requirement to do risk management activities, maintaining a risk register, and also reviewing coding. If you do any of your own internal coding, that was part of the old CMMC, those additional 20. Those might get put back into NIST 800-171 later this year. Currently, they're not.
So just to be clear, like, that's now all of that stuff that was not is now in level 2, or will be in level 2.
Might be.
That's the speculation, because 800-171 is going through a revision this year, and so there's a good chance those controls might make it into there. Currently, it's just the original 110 800-171 controls that are for level 2, and level 2 is for any company that works with CUI data, whether it's in their contract as a prime, or if they're getting it flow down from a prime contractor, they're a subcontractor. So it's important, if you're a subcontractor, to communicate with your prime contractors to ensure that the information you're getting from them, whether it's CUI, is it being labeled, and you're able to protect it accordingly. So level 3.
I was going to say that makes sense. So there's a question in the chat, and then go to level 3, because it's a question about level 1, which is, Michael says, if a contractor states that we must meet NIST 171, are we in compliance with CMMC level 1? Are we if we're meeting the NIST requirement?
Yes. So the 17 practices in level 1 are also in level 2. So if you're meeting level 2, then you also are meeting level 1. You don't have to get separate assessments unless you're segregating a level 1 network from a level 2 network. For instance, if you know you can house federal contract information, which is what's covered under level 1, in a subnet that's isolated from your CUI network that's subject to level 2, you could do that if that's how you want to approach it. And you could do 2 separate assessments, potentially saving you money. But it's really dependent on how your organization operates and what your goals are going forward.
Cool. And I interrupted you. You were going level 3.
Yeah. So level 3 is level 4 and 5 together. It keeps building on itself. So you've got the NIST 800-171 controls, but now you're also adding the 800-172 controls. 800-172 is also going through a revision. So towards the end of the year, we'll get a better idea of what that looks like. But what you can do now is just focus on what the current standard is, and those are those documents that are out. And so those assessments are going to be done by the government, and they're going to be done by DIBCAC. That's the organization that's been doing these assessments for the Defense Industrial Base for DFARs all along. They're going to handle the level 3 assessments every 3 years, and then level 2 will be also it'll be triennial, and it'll be done by third-party assessment. So self-assessment is no longer a thing with level 2. you will be able to continue to self-assess at level 1. All right. Yeah, I mean, if we don't have any further questions about the difference between level 1 or CMMC 1.0 and 2.0, we could probably move on.
I'll throw a little color there. One thing that is, I think, still open is level 3. They said there's going to be selected controls from NIST 800-172. Now they may end up selecting all the controls because they can, when you say selected, it's whatever you choose. But they have not come out and finally said that it's all of NIST 800-172 will be level 3. So there's still ambiguity, and none of this will be finalized until probably at the earliest of May next year.
And hey, Fred, what do you, I mean, based on everything going on in the world and DoD's back and forth, I mean, what do you think they're going to choose? Do you think it's going to be the equal of what level 5 used to be, or what do you think they're going to do?
Well, I think the fact that the world is basically at war right now is going to change everyone's opinion on what needs to be in place. And if we certainly, if we see successful attacks against the defense industrial base during this Ukrainian-Russian conflict, I think it's just going to push the bar and the needle all the way to the red line here, and they're going to go with pretty much everything. So I wouldn't be surprised if basically it's level 3 is just NIST 800-172 in the new rev. So that's my take, anyways.
Yeah. And another thing I forgot to point out, with the CMMC 1.0, you had the maturity processes of policies and procedures that was talked about in the actual assessment guide. So the assessments were actually going to review your policies in a very specific way to make sure that they included specific language. Now you don't see that on CMMC 2.0, but the catch is that in this SP 800-171, there's an Appendix E, and in there is what's called the non-federal organization controls, the NFO controls. Those list the controls that are implied that the organization is already doing in their security program. And the reason that is because NIST 800-171 was written, it's tailored from 853, and it's specifically dealing with confidentiality of CUI. It's not addressing, those 110 controls are not addressing integrity and availability. Those are covered in the NFO controls. And in those controls, there is also the requirement for policies and procedures. And so it's also going to help you when you get to the point where you do your certified assessment. You're going to want to have these policies and procedures to show your certified assessor how you're meeting these controls. And it's just good security to have governance over your security program.
And I'm curious for folks in the audience here, and you put it in the chat, what level are you aiming for? I know Michael had asked about level 1, but what level are you aiming for? And one of the arguments that was why they had dropped the first one is this wasn't fair for, they said mom and pop shops, but that this wasn't fair to have folks going through this. And just to give us an idea of who's in the audience, we have level 2, level 2, level 3, level 2, level 2. So that gives you a sense, Dustin, Alith, and Fred, of who's here. And then David says for level 2, any idea what select programs might be for self-assessment?
Right. So that was the initial intent of the DoD in November. They quickly in February released a new statement that they were no longer going to do the self-assessments for level 2 due to the fact they could not determine which programs contained national security relevant information versus programs that do not. And it was their decision that they were just going to do third-party certified assessments for all level 2 organizations.
And to quote Mike Hamilton, who's the other founder of the company and our CISO, self-assessments are aspirational. he said that in talking about insurance, but sometimes also applies here. So let me go to the next slide, and we're going to go back to this question of whether this is fair, and and how to get here quickly and where to start. But we got a couple more here.
Yeah, so this is kind of like the big question of, all right, well, when do I have to do this? Like, when is this going to become a reality? When will I have to get my assessment? And so, like we talked about earlier, it has to do with the rulemaking and how they enforce it. So there's really 4 pieces to this equation. Is you have the FAR CUI rule. That deals with the entire government. So we've all been waiting for this since the beginning of the Dfars in 2016, because this is more than just the DoD. This covers Department of Homeland Security. It's the entire government enforcing a FAR CUI rule. So this deals more with with labeling and enforcing clauses in contracts for the entire government. So that's supposed to be released any day now. There was talks that it would be February, March. I haven't heard if it's been released yet, but expect that real soon. The next part is the Dfars rules. There's 2 rules that are going to be released for comment. There's the CFR 32 and the CFR 48. One deals with the programmatic elements of CMMC, just how it's going to work from a program perspective. And then the 48 deals with putting that requirement into contracts. So now it's become the law of the land, and then that makes it so that everyone is going to have to start doing it. The thing is, though, is that the DoD CISO has come out and stated that they're most likely going to phase it into contracts, because it would not make sense to have all 80,000 contractors have to go out and get a certified assessment in 2023. There isn't even the capability to do that, which we'll cover in the next part of this, the CMMC section. But so they're planning on phasing it in. My guess is they'll probably do it at least over a 3-year period, if not a 6-year period, because if they have to get an assessment every 3 years, you're going to want to break it up, and you need C3 PAOs to do these assessments. And so that's the next part, is that with the CMMC program, the CMMC AB, the accreditation board, they're the organization that accredits the C3 PAOs, and they are the ones that hire and train the certified assessors, and they'll be listed on the marketplace listings on the CMMC AB website for you to select yourself the company you want to work with and get your certified assessment. So those are actually, there's a handful that are already approved right now. There's a couple hundred that are waiting to get approved. They have to get assessed as well. They have to get a level 2 assessment, and they're getting those from the DIDCAC. And the DIDCAC is a small organization. They don't have the ability to assess all 200 of them in a short period of time. So that is going to be a factor in whether this gets pushed to the right a little bit. The intent is that they're going to allow organizations, contractors, to obtain certified assessments before the rulemaking starts, which they're projecting between December and May of 2023. December of this year and May of 2023 is when those rules get released for the DFARS. So before that, they're talking about allowing companies to get assessments as a way to have a competitive advantage over other companies that don't. And so, if there's talk that what companies are they going to start with? Well, probably the big primes, right? And so those primes need subcontractors. They have a huge supply chain that needs to also be certified. So if you become a certified company ahead of time, you're going to set yourself up for having an advantage over companies that are not, and during these first few years.
And hey, Dustin and Fred, that advantage. So what, do we know what, when you say sets them up for an advantage, what does that mean? Do they?
Right. Yeah. So, when say a large prime contractor obtains a contract with a CMMC requirement in it, and they have to flow that down to all their subcontractors, in order for them to be able to perform on that contract, they need subcontractors that are also compliant. And if when they're sourcing, when the prime is sourcing their subcontractors, that's going to be one of the first things on their checklist, because it's an automatic disqualifier. So if you're a company that has it, you're automatically qualified. You get pushed to the top of the list, or you maintain your business, because you're probably already doing business with these primes already. So, they also have to train the assessors, and so that their certifications are starting to come out probably in June-ish this summer. And so even though you have C3 PAOs, you also need assessors, a lot of assessors. And so there's a big push to train and certify assessors to go out and do this work. So those are some factors, including the certified, or the assessment guide, right? So the DoD has to release how the assessments are supposed to be conducted. And that's another piece that's going to come out around the same time the certifications come out, so that those assessors can get certified in the proper methodology, and then they can go out and start assessing companies. So look for that around the middle of this year.
So Jake, what I'd like to talk about is there's a line on this slide. It says, when will compliance become mandatory? And of course, that's referring to CMMC 2.0. But the reality is compliance to NIST 800-171 has been a requirement since 2016, when Dustin mentioned that this first came out. It has literally been the requirement the entire time that you be compliant with NIST 800-171. What they've lacked, and what the CMMC program is meant to do, is provide a method of enforcement to where they can actually vet, are these people doing what they've told us they're doing? Because when you put a bid into the supplier portal for the DoD, you now upload a scorecard, or how you're doing with this 800-171. And that is meant to be an attestation. In other words, when you load that scorecard, you're making a claim, a legal claim to the government, that you're meeting these requirements, or that you've missed certain things, because the scorecard, again, gives you a score based on how well you're doing. But I always want to go back and remind people that this has been the law. This has been where you're supposed to have been for over 6 years now. And the fact that we're finally settling into level 2 of CMMC version 2 is really the same thing we've always needed to be compliant with, this 800-171. So as much as we are saying, look how much is changing here, it's the wrapping around this, it's the enforcement regime, it's the assessment and certification regime that's changing, it's some of the deadlines on when they're going to start enforcing and doing the attestation. But the reality is, you've always needed to be compliant with this, full stop.
And based on if people are doing the self-attestation and uploading their scorecards, do you think once they have to have external audits and external and have external folks look at it, that some of the things that are on those scorecards will turn out not to be quite right?
I would say a ton of the things on those scorecards will turn out to be not right. I think most of the clients that we talk to look at us and say, we did our best effort here, but we don't even believe what we've put here. And when we go in and help people and begin to help people become CMMC 2.0 compliant, we're finding that their scorecards are aspirational, as Mike Hamilton liked to use the term. This is what we think we're doing, or this is what we kind of hope we're doing. But the reality, of course, is much different than what people hope they're doing. And when you get to the point of collecting artifacts, which of course is how ultimately you start proving things, it's show me a record that shows me, show me a policy that dictates that you're doing this. That's when the rubber hits the road, and that's when the assessment phase. This is where there's no slipping and sliding and kind of guesswork. You're going to be in compliance or not, based on the methods that get published on how they're going to go out and do these assessments, right? So that those methodologies there's some that, that were previously out there for 1.0, CMMC 1.0. but they're going to be evolving, of course, for the newer kind of recategorized standards.
Got it.
Yeah, and another factor that makes self-assessments not as accurate as they probably think they are is that when you're doing your self-assessment, you really need to use the 800-171 alpha, the A after the 171, the assessment guide, because that document includes all of the objective statements under each 110 control. So if you're only self-assessing based on the larger control statement, you're missing all of the pieces, objective statements under that control that also need to be implemented. And that's what a certified assessor is going to do. That's what a third-party consultant that does a gap analysis is going to do. They're going to go through your system and assess you on the assessment guide. And that's usually when we see differences, is because your self-assessment might have been correct under the way that you conducted it, but you missed a larger part of the control statement.
Sure. And I mean, without somebody coming and checking, it's been okay, or it's been accepted. I guess it hasn't been okay, but it's been accepted, right?
Right.
You want to hit the next slide, or do you have anything more on this one?
Yeah, then the NIST part of this is just reiterating the revisions that are happening later this year in the fall. And so, focus on what the standard is now, but just keep in mind things are going to change, and CMMC requires you to continuously keep up on it and update your security program to make sure that you're meeting all those requirements.
Dustin had also mentioned too, everybody looks at 800-171A, but there's a B, right? And B is probably ultimately going to be as important as what is found in A. And you need to read all of it. You need to understand how it fits together and how you're going to meet those requirements, because it's not as simple as what you find in Part A.
Got it. And I'm curious from the audience here, if there's a part of this that you think is most challenging that you want us to talk about, if there's something in 171A or B, or 172. If you have any questions, go ahead and toss them in the chat there. And I think this one of the most interesting slides is what happens if you get it wrong? What happens if you're not compliant?
Yeah, so this is, everybody's got a little bit different opinion on how this is going to play out. But the number one thing that everybody worries about is I will, A, be excluded from bidding on DoD contracts, or I will be put into the category of not compliant or not certified, which doesn't mean that you cannot still win a government contract, but it means everybody else that has that certification in place will be immediately placed ahead of you. And it's only if they go through the list of certified candidates for a particular contract and they say that, well, we don't like any of these, or if nobody that applies to that contract is certified, those are the only times that you're going to get a shot at potentially bidding on that work, right? So you may also be in the middle of something that you have an existing contract and you find out you're not compliant with the CMMC, and then you lose a contract. In other words, that contract is terminated. Again, if you're found out to be lying or misrepresenting at a kind of a gross negligence level, you can be prevented from ever bidding on a government contract. And ultimately, because this is defense related, potentially if you're flat out misrepresenting things to get contracts, you are potentially civilly or even criminally liable. So all these things, it's kind of the standard set of things that you might expect here, but the way these can all be exposed, it's not just, hey, we've gone through our audit and they found some stuff. There may be somebody within the organization that says, hey, they're not doing what they say they're doing, and I'm going to make sure that they are, because I'm concerned that this is going to compromise national defense. You may have the auditors show up after the fact. They're auditing after the fact on a contract. There may be an investigation if, in fact, some data has been lost, if we find out, hey, you seem to be the source of this particular loss of CUI, then they're going to be all over you trying to figure out how it happened. And of course, there's going to be probably punishment associated with that. And then these are government contracts. Government contracts can be exposed through a Freedom of Information Act request. And there may be information that maybe activist groups find out that they can bring to bear and say that, in fact, you're not meeting the standard that you should be meeting. So there's a lot more ways than just, hey, we didn't pass our certification audit. There's a whole bunch of other ways that this can all come down on your head. So I think most people think about this as, yes, I'm going to be compliant and certified the day that they force me to do this. I think that's not the best approach to this. It's a long process to get to where you need to be. I think you need to get good at these things. They need to be part of your day-to-day operations before you are going to walk in and say, hey, we just finished putting the bow on this package. It's ready to go. It should be well worn. It should be something that has been ingrained into the organizational practices and processes.
Yeah, and I mean, it might seem like a little bit of a tangent here, but, one of our predictions coming into 2022, before the Russia-Ukraine war erupted, was that in this year, we would see more activists infiltrating companies, breaching for all sorts of reasons. And so, especially now, I think we're starting to see, more nation state actors. We're starting to see, the Russian gangs, which don't have, a way to get money in Russia right now. And we're starting to see activists on both sides with this IT army just sort of kick up. And who knows where that's going to go this year.
So the thing that I want to point out that I think, and again, Dustin mentioned this, if you're a contractor, you're not a prime, you're a sub to a prime contractor. You're going to be a target because everybody knows it's easier to go for subcontractors to get to a well-protected prime, right? It's easier to go through the small, less protected, less well-funded organization. So you're going to be a target for hackers. You also should be receiving the whatever compliance requirements should be pushed down to you contractually. It is a requirement that the prime contractors that are going to share CUI or FCI with their subs, that they are putting the exact requirements that they need to push down to those subs in their contracts. I will tell you, I don't see that. I don't see many places, even some extremely large defense contractors, that are still not pushing down their CMMC or Dfar's requirements contractually down to their subs. So I would say a couple things. One, don't think you can wait for the government certification to get in place, because these primes are getting pressure already from the DoD. They're already saying to them, look, we know it's coming, but we want you, because we know you have critical defense information. We want you to become compliant as fast as possible. That same thing will ripple down and flow down. If they say that to Boeing or Lockheed or Raytheon, and you're a subcontractor to them, that stuff's going to be landing in your lap a lot sooner than when you need to be compliant with the regulation, because they're going to make that a contractual requirement. And it doesn't matter that the government is not ready yet. They're the ones that are going to be handing it to you and saying, you want the contract, you need to comply. So again, the levers that are going to get pulled here are not just by the government. It's going to be by the main contractors that most of the small contractors are providing products and services to. That's where this is going to come down, and they're going to move faster than the government's going to move.
Mm-hmm. And, speaking of products and services, I know a lot of folks are looking for, some folks are trying to do this internally. They're saying, okay, we can do it with our own people. One, is that a good idea? And two is, if you decide to go outside to do this and you decide to use a vendor, one, how do you look for a vendor? And two, like, what kind of vendors are you looking for?
Well, one thing to think about with CMMC is that it's an organizational security program. it requires the entire organization to implement the practices. And so, yes, you can outsource certain functions of CMMC to manage services like MDR, incident response, vCISO type services that handle a lot of the compliance tasks and things, risk management, vulnerability assessments. But there's also just the day-to-day working with the CUI. You have people that handle it. They need to know what to do. They need to be trained on what to do. You have human resources that have a lot of pieces in the access control procedures for onboarding and offboarding employees. You have facilities required to physically protect CUI. And so everyone in the organization needs to know what they're responsible for and be held accountable to maintain your compliance. But there's definitely managed services that can help out with that, especially for smaller organizations, small to medium organizations that just don't have the resources internally to handle all these compliance tasks. If you can outsource the monitoring of your network and the auditing and the incident response part that's highly skilled, requires people that have years of experience in dealing with these type of incidents, that frees your security people, your IT people up to do the internal processes. It also allows them to take on more privileged duties because you have some other organization monitoring the activity. So you have your separation of duty practices that are being met, and you can get all those services for a fraction of a price that you would by just hiring people to fill those roles. But so it's a mixed, it has to be a hybrid solution for CMMC. You can't outsource it to a company, and you certainly can't just let IT deal with it. You have to bring the whole organization together to be able to actually maintain your compliance.
And Elise, I know you've been working with some organizations on this. How are they? So look, this is not a sales webinar. We do some of this stuff, and Elise and Dustin and Fred have all been working with customers who've been on this CMMC journey. Elise, what does that look like when companies have used us for it?
Typically, our clients are looking at this from the perspective of trying to get ahead of it. Some of them don't even believe that they're processing CUI yet, and they learn during the course of our initial scoping and data flow process that they do, in fact, handle and process CUI already. So this is something I think a little like an ounce of prevention goes, a long way. And just taking those initial steps of starting to look at both policy and procedure and defining the scope and mapping out data flows and where that CUI is traveling to and from and who's touching it and talking to those people is really critical before you even start to look at what the controls are and what you need to comply with. That is essential. And I think that our clients, for the most part, are still working through those initial stages, and having the opportunity to have a third party come in and kind of question those things, they don't take for granted what they think they already know. It gives them another opportunity to review those items and ask the questions that need to be asked to really understand what their environment looks like and where they could potentially add more separation, what they need to consider as being in scope or out of scope, before they even start tackling the control section of the assessment.
That is such a great point, in that what we've found is a lot of companies are saying, we want to get in on DoD contracts, or we have one or two, but we don't know what the other contracts we're going to bid on. So we say, well, where is your intake for CUI? Well, we don't know yet because we don't have the contract in place. So we're partially having to have people visualize what their operations will be at full tilt when, hopefully a bunch of contracts are in place. Where is that data going to come? And a lot of times we're saying, well, you need to build this process for the future and stick to it. When we build out your policies and your processes, it needs to match what you think is going to happen, because a lot of this stuff is not happening right now. right? You're waiting to get the contracts before this starts happening. So, and I think both Dustin and Alith mentioned, the first thing you need to do is map out data flows. You've got to know where the data is going, what systems, what people, where it comes in, how it gets marked and classified as it comes in the door. We know the government is terrible, frankly, about marking their own UI coming in the door. They're probably the worst offenders. Hate to say it. So it's on you then to start understanding what is FCI, what is CUI, where's it coming in, how are we identifying that stuff so it's going to the right enclaves on our network, being handled by the appropriate people with the right access, right? And it all starts by understanding where that data is moving, where it's going, or where it may move in the future.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big challenge, I think, for a lot of people.
Hey, and Pat asked a question, or Pat had a statement in the chat, but I'm just going to focus on the first 4 words. Pat says a good service provider will have a clearly defined responsibility matrix. I mean, the first 4 words, a good service provider. How do you find one? Like, how do you know?
Well, you can always look at, I would look to, like, for example, Microsoft and the shared responsibility model that you see in the cloud. Same thing with Amazon. They have well-defined responsibility matrices. And frankly, most people now are working with a cloud service provider. If you're, for example, in AWS Govcloud or the Microsoft Govcloud, there is a shared responsibility matrix that says, here's what we do, here's what we don't do, and that is your responsibility. And there are some things that are, I do it and you do it, right? So there's like 3 columns in the matrix. There's what we do, here's what we both do, here's what you do. Although they don't fill out the here's what you do. You have to kind of fill in that these are the gaps left over from what they're saying they do. And in the end, you have a giant matrix that describes everybody's responsibilities, both your cloud providers if they're involved, your contractors if they're involved, your internal people and processes where they're involved. And all these need to be tied back to the controls. Who's owning it? Who's managing it? Who's making sure this control is working as planned?
Yeah, another consideration along with the cloud providers is making sure that they are CMMC Dfars compliant. So, when you're assessing whether the cloud provider is going to work for you, if they're claiming that they're 800.171 compliant, but they don't mention anything about Dfar's requirements, you're going to need to ask them, do you have the ability to provide forensic support to the logs and the data that you're hosting? Do you have only U.S. persons working on that environment? Is it in a U.S. in controlled environment? Those are Dfar's rules. You're not going to find those in the CMMC practices. They don't talk about that in 800.171. But that's important because it's not just 800.171, it's also Dfars. And so when you're selecting those cloud environments, you have to ensure that they meet all the requirements.
And one of the things I think we've set up here is, it's important to do it right. It's important to do it fast because there are these incentives. Some are possible and some are real incentives to doing it fast and doing it first. When you think about that, if I'm leading a company, I'm like, all right, well, how do we do that? We could do it internally, but maybe if we go externally, there are tools and services out there that I could get that will help me speed up the process. So, how do you decide what tools and services to buy to speed up this process?
Well, that's probably an individual, characteristic of each individual organization will have different needs. But the thing that historically we see over and over is the monitoring of the network, because really you want 24/7, 365 monitoring in this day and age. Whether you're being forced to do it or not, that's just a basic practice. If you're not doing that, you're driving down the freeway blindfolded at 75 miles an hour, right? That's not how you want to be cruising. So doing the things that are very difficult to do in-house, things that require hiring unicorns, security analysts are one of the most difficult to hire roles on the planet Earth, literally right now. and trying to go out and build your own security operations center, run a 24/7 operation, manage a bunch of unicorns that, you know, the big companies are going to want to roll a dump truck full of money in front of them to steal away once they're trained. You don't want to be in that business, right? I don't think most people want to be in that business unless you're of a particular size that makes it practical for you to do that. So I would look at certainly outsourcing that sort of component. If you're not someone or a company that has somebody who is a CMMC kind of expert, you probably should have guidance throughout the process, and probably in the form of a virtual CISO or something similar to that. So you can have somebody steering the ship and bringing up these potholes that you're going to hit before you land in them, and helping to the company to make strategic decisions that are not going to break the bank, that are not going to be, I'm going to spend a whole bunch of money to check a box and get no real value out of that. You got to avoid those things, right? So having a good plan, looking at the particular things that are outsourceable, the things that are appropriate for you to do in-house, and then kind of building a program based on that. That's really how you have to do it, I think.
And, you know, there's a question in the chat here, Dustin, you answered it, but I think it deserves saying out loud here, which is, do all of my vendors need to attest to CMMC level 2? Maybe not the guy that fills the soda machine? Dustin.
So it depends. And so, all right. So it's a way that the DoD released their scoping guide, and it depends on, you know, does the service provider have assets that are considered CUI assets? Do they store, process, or transmit CUI, either their own or yours? Does that CUI get transmitted to their systems? If so, they're in scope. They're considered an external service provider. Now, or another scenario, they provide security services to your CUI assets. They're now considered a security protection asset. They're in scope of the CMMC assessment. With security protection assets, you know, if they're providing those services, that's where those customer responsibility matrices come into play. You want to be able to show the assessor what tasks those vendors are doing, so you can show that those are being implemented in your environment. You need to be able to produce evidence of that, and that they're doing it in a compliant environment, because if they're subject to CMMC, they're also subject to Dfar. So they're going to have the same type of considerations with their cloud systems and the people that work with them. They're also going to have to vet their people to be U.S. persons. There can't be any type of commingling between international and U.S. type work. Now, as far as people with the vending machine, it depends. Is the vending machine on the shop floor where you have diagrams laying on a table are marked CUI? If so, then I would suggest that you run them through a background investigation and make sure it's the same people coming in and out, and that you're handling your physical protections. You know, do you have cameras set up, you know, to protect the physical environment? There's a whole security domain in CMMC about physical security, but it also goes into access control. And so there are elements that do apply to even the soda vendor.
I would even say too, since most vending machines now are networked and have operating systems running inside them, if you're putting that on the same network that you've identified as your level 2 enclave, then that soda machine is in scope for CMMC just by its virtue of sitting on that network. So not only do you probably not want it on the factory floor, you at least want it walled off on a completely separate network. And it's even best to put it out in the lobby and make people walk in and out to get the soda.
And I mean, even more important, you know, is it, does it matter if it's Coke or Pepsi? No, I'm just kidding. So a couple more things here. We just have a few minutes left. One of the things I want to tell people is every time we do one of these webinars, we give folks a survey. And I'm going to put the survey in the chat, even though we have some more to go here and a couple more things. But we really appreciate when people take the surveys. Sometimes it may not seem like it, but all of our webinars have gotten better based on feedback from folks. And so if you could take the survey, that'd be great. We, of course, recognize the irony of getting a bunch of security people in a room and then giving them a link. But, you know, such is life. The other thing I want to share is you know, sort of who we are and the services we provide. One of the things that we do, obviously, is policy and compliance and the vCISO work that we've been talking about here. We also provide 24/7 threat detection investigation. It's so important to have a SOC, you know, that has your back, whether you get it from us, whether you get it from somebody else. Like, you know, it's important for security, not just for CMMC. So please do that. The other thing I want to bring up is our email addresses. If you want to get in touch with us, those are our email addresses. I also answer our 800 number on our website. So if you call at 1 a.m., you get me, and then I'll go wake up Elise and Fred, depending on what you're calling about. But we don't want to call for an emergency. We don't want to meet you for an emergency in the middle of the night. But those are all of our email addresses there. So you know, I want to get to final thoughts here. Elise, what do you want to leave people with here?
Really, I think the best thing to focus on is that ounce of prevention and taking a look at your policies and procedures and starting to just chip away, because this is going to feel extremely overwhelming. And there is no easy button, but there are absolutely resources that you can tap to help with some more of that administrative and project management type stuff. But project management is critical to getting movement in a project like this, especially when it'll likely span years.
Dustin, final thoughts?
Yeah, just if you're asking where do I get started, you know, start with what's currently required. You know, you need to have a system security plan and a POAM and an incident response capability to be able to report to the DoD if you have an incident within 72 hours. So work on getting that done, create your POAM, and start knocking out items off your POAM, like Elise said, in a structured way where you're managing the project. It's going to take some time. This isn't something that happens overnight. Just know it takes anywhere from 6 months to a year to get the program implemented, and then you have to maintain it. So just take it one step at a time.
Awesome. And Fred, you're going to get your final thought in a second after you answer the question that just came in, which is, as a service provider, are you required to communicate and interact with your clients via a Govcloud?
Well, you're not required, but it's really difficult to be compliant with CMMC if you're not in a Govcloud environment. As a matter of fact, I think they've calculated that if you're in a like AWS non-Govcloud, there's about 8 to 12 different controls that just have no way that you're going to actually implement in the non-Govcloud environment. So that's one of the challenges. One of the interesting things is a lot of things aren't available yet in, for example, AWS GovCloud. For example, their IDS system, GuardDuty, just became available in GovCloud East only. So even in some of the GovCloud implementations, you're still behind the 8 ball because some of the features and services are not available in all environments yet.
And now, Fred, now you get to do your final thoughts.
I'm just going to extend on what both Dustin and Elise said. You know, people are always saying this means we have a reprieve now. We can take our time. You know, we can put all this off, and you know, it's out in the future. We don't have to worry about this. And I say, this is a gift to you, so you don't have to run around with your hair on fire, making probably a couple poor decisions on, hey, we just need to be compliant. Let's do what it takes. This gives you the time to work your way into it, to do it the right way, right? To build out, and keep in mind that your environment is going to evolve, and you need to build an infrastructure that is going to remain compliant as you evolve the services you're providing in there. So start now. Don't wait. I mean, everybody thought, it's all over. We can get to forget about this. And I'd say this is a gift to you to say, now you can be very measured and very calculated in how you approach this. You can do it so it's going to minimize the impact and cost to your organization, because you're not rushing in to fix it and throw a million Band-Aids on and hope it holds.
Awesome. Thanks, you all. And while we've been going here, a piece of good news, the Major League Baseball and players came to terms. So the baseball season will start, which for those of us who love baseball is a big deal. So excited. All right. Also, back to this reminder of the survey. I put it in the chat. You do get a gift card when you complete that, or you can donate the value of your gift card to Girls Who Code, which is a great charity that we donate to, and we hope that you do too. So please take the survey. We really appreciate you being here today. On behalf of Elise and Fred and Dustin and all of us at Critical Insight, have an awesome day. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.